Welcome to another episode of the Left of Lansing podcast with Pat Johnston. A progressive insight into Michigan's political and cultural world. And of course, an entertaining podcast designed to shine a light on how to make Michigan's political machine work for the people. Now, from the Left of Lansing headquarters, located in his attic, here's the award-winning Pat Johnston.
Oh, yeah. Welcome to another installment of Michigan's premier progressive podcast. I am Pat Johnston, and yes, I have a little more energy this week than I did last when we knew the country had selected a lifelong con man and a fascist to the White House. It's tough to still completely come to grips with what's going on in our country right now, and I don't blame those for needing a little break from the country right now after the election. For me, I find escape in watching football, for instance, which is nice too at this moment because, as a Lions and a Steelers fan, they're bringing some much needed escapism for me. And I love watching shows, so I'm getting, a little lost on Netflix and Hulu. And I think I'm finally going to get caught up on some books that I've been meaning to read here for quite a while. So cashing out and needing to take care of your own mental health is the way to go, and I completely endorse it. You've heard me talk about my good friend Rich, who helped develop leftoflansing.com. Well, he and his wife are already bypassing the Thanksgiving decorations and moving on to getting a few Christmas decorations up and a few of their many, many Christmas trees up and decorated as well. And you know what? That's fine. That's how they're dealing with the reality of another Trump presidency. And I bet you they are not the only ones across America doing the same thing. I saw an episode of Friends over the week, which, I also use as some escapism. And I'm watching the episode where Joey finds out about Monica and Chandler dating. And one of the signs that Joey figured out is when both Monica and Chandler talk about meeting Donald Trump on their business trips, which weren't business trips, in quotations. They were on a weekend getaway, so their friends didn't know that they were together. And what used to always be a cute and funny scene for me is now forever ruined because of Trump. And after that scene aired, I turned off Friends. I think it's because I had this realization that not only has Trump been part of the pop culture life or scene during my entire life, but worse, he's been part of this country's political life for the last 12 years. It is beyond depressing. And I know I sounded despondent and depressed in last week's episode, but I do appreciate all of you who listened, and I appreciate your emails, one of which really touched me, and I will share it as part of this week's Left of Lansing Last Call, coming up after my talk with Livingston County progressive activist and social media influencer for Michigan progressives, Kasey Helton. Now, Kasey shared a spot-on, enlightening, and quite therapeutic Facebook Live video right after the election. I'm providing a link to that video wherever you're listening to this, but it's something that our side must do because we're getting destroyed, completely destroyed by the MAGA world when it comes to connecting with others on digital media. You see, that's the future, and we need to support each other. And those with some funds who back progressive causes must help those of us who are out here trying to spread and connect progressive messages with other progressives, not just on a federal level, but also on a state and local level. That's why I've started doing a Left of Lansing YouTube live chat every Monday at 4 p.m. Not only is it a way for me to talk about some of the issues and stories affecting the state of Michigan and the country, but it's a way to talk with many of you out there, many of you needing to make sense of what the hell is happening, because many of us are wandering around in the dark, cold wilderness right now at this moment. I found this cartoon by John Octor on Michigan Public Radio that really, really resonated with me and how I'm feeling, and maybe how many of us are feeling. There are two men walking towards the woods on a gray, cold autumn day, and the one man says to the other, "I guess we're not going back, just didn't resonate with enough voters." And the other man replies, "Because apparently we never left." I'm afraid that is the cold, harsh truth of where we are. And while we are lost in the wilderness right now, we progressives and liberals are, of course, fighting amongst each other because, hey, that's our favorite pastime. That's what we love to do. We love to fight with each other, I suppose. And it's sad. It is sad because, yes, I understand. A slim majority of the voting American population chose to go with a guy who's been handed everything. Really, he's been handed everything during his whole privileged life. And this guy is also a sexual assaulter. He's a convicted felon, a fraudster, and just an egomaniac clown. It's really sad because I view Trump, I had this thought over the week, I view Trump as the Timothy Dalton character in the Paramount show 1923, which is a prequel to the Yellowstone series. And Dalton's character in that show is a wealthy, crooked, powerful man. Who's that sound like? Who's trying to gobble up the Dutton family's land. But there's a sequence in 1923 where we get more insight into Dalton's evil character and his evil nature. To get himself off, or sexually, or to just find pleasure in being a powerful player, Dalton's character purchases 2 young prostitutes. Now, at first you think he's just going to have sex with them, but no. He sits back in his chair in the bedroom and orders one of the women to viciously whip the other. It is a torturous scene and a very difficult scene to watch. What makes it worse is that Timothy Dalton's character just sits back and he grins. And you're thinking he's getting sexual pleasure from just watching this. But then there's a twist. In the next encounter, he once again has the same woman whipping the other. But then he suddenly stops it. And you think for a second that he stopped it for good and will tell them that they can go home. But no, he tells the women to switch their roles so the one getting whipped gets to do the whipping. And once she has the whip, she inflicts ferocious pain on the other and is completely unforgiving of her fellow coworker. Then the camera switches and we watch Dalton's character get even more excited and his smile gets even bigger because his little experiment worked. He's gotten the women to turn on each other, with the second one inflicting more pain and more harm to the first one. And to me, that is a perfect metaphor for what Trump and MAGA are all about. He was able to get people to turn on each other, while he and billionaires like Elon Musk and the Adelson family sit back and laugh all the way to the bank and to the control panels of our governmental powers. They got the working class to turn on each other this election. Whites against whites, blacks against blacks, whites against blacks, women against women, Latinos against Latinos, some people against the trans community, and even Arab Americans against those who've long tried to back them since the Bush years. He got just enough people to fight amongst themselves so that he is now, once again, in power. And frankly, I don't think it's hyperbole to say that he won't try to run again in 2028, even though the Constitution forbids it. And I really believe that. You see, since corporatists run our newspapers like the Washington Post and Gannett News Services, since right-wing corporatists own many local TV stations like Sinclair, since right-wing corporatists own many radio stations, since right-wing billionaires like Musk own Twitter, and since billionaires are willing to put up money for several MAGA podcasters, they're able to spread their messages of misinformation, disinformation, and straight-out lies to millions and millions of people. Breaking through that kind of right-wing misinformation barrier is an arduous and, frankly, painstaking task. Now, all that being said, I have to tell you, we cannot forget what the Democratic Party did. All right, they are partially to blame. It's also the fault of the National Democratic Party. They ceded some ground to Trump and the Republicans by not fighting for the working class and adopting more of a populist message. I mean, the only thing that Trump could say that he really accomplished, economically speaking, for the people during his first presidency was passing tax cuts for the rich donor base and slashing the corporate tax rate. And that's basically the same message that he's touting around this time. Oh, I know. He promised deflation, which would devastate the economy, but he's not smart enough to know anything about that, or he believes his followers are too dumb to understand that fact, which is why They will blame someone else when the price of eggs never drop. But he's proposing further cuts to the corporate tax rate. Further cuts to the corporate tax rate. I mean, that's nuts. It is. It is freaking nuts, considering corporations and lax regulations on monopolies led to the price gouging and the greedflation that we've been experiencing here for the last few years. Slashing the corporate tax rate was supposed to save us all kinds of money. Hey, how'd that work out for all of us? You see? It never was supposed to work for all of us, only for the corporations and the rich donor base that backs Donald Trump. Yet, Democrats could not beat that kind of an awful brand. Sure, corporate media were to blame for tamping down on some of the economic successes thanks to the Biden-Harris presidency, and there were some. There really were some really major victories, including their strong support for unions. But they weren't out there talking endlessly about corporate greed, greedflation, corporate corruption, and more. And I think that was a major, major error. And I'm not sure who gets to be these paid inside the party consultants, but they really did fail on one level, and that was trying so hard to be in the mushy middle, which, to be honest, I'm not sure what constitutes the middle anymore, especially after last week, but it seems like the Liz Cheney experiment did not really move people. It didn't tug at their heartstrings. And as we're seeing by the latest numbers, Trump did not increase. He did not increase at all his numbers from 2020, but Democrats fell short in attracting their 2020 voters to get to the polls. And maybe there's something to be said about the fact that instead of rolling out failed neocons like Liz Cheney, Kamala Harris needed to focus on not being the establishment and instead paint Donald Trump as the establishment. You see, neoliberalism has failed, both in saving the working class and saving democracy. Harris should have run as what we used to know as a Democrat, fighting for the working class. Yes, it's true. Biden did pass some good bills, increased manufacturing and jobs, and helped us recover from Trump's awful COVID responses, no doubt. But the truth is, people always want to know that you are fighting for them. Michigan Democrats, for example, lost the state house this year after just having the majority for one term. And that further depressed me a lot last week. There are many reasons to blame, of course. But I have to agree with Progressive Democratic State Representative Betsy Kafia, who posted that not only did she win, but she increased her voting margin this year in the 103rd district around Traverse City. And that's a district, by the way, that did go a little bluer in this election. And Kafia says it's because she didn't hide from her votes. She explained her votes, and she was able to build a fundraising war chest without begging for corporate dollars. Why? Because she demonstrated that she cared about the people. She also wrote that, and I'm quoting here, "I was outright told by Lansing insiders that I should be afraid to take these kinds of votes for the people, but I wasn't. I stood firm that I could be honest and upfront with my community that I'm, a Democrat, and also earn their respect for being deeply loyal to my community and its people before all, and deliver the goods for them. I never hid from my votes, and I worked my ass off to be present and accountable to my community to deliver locally relevant wins during my first term." And Betsy Kafia explained how she proudly voted for free breakfast and lunch for every school child, repealed the burdensome retirement tax, expanded the working family tax credit to bring dollars back to folks' pockets, and that she also ran a local campaign, pragmatic and people-focused. And she touted securing over $100 million in transportation funds for her rural district, a district that really desperately needed that kind of money. You see, that's progressivism in action, everyone, and it's what most progressive Democrats should do. It's how they should talk to people. Talk with conviction, show conviction, and demonstrate conviction, and show everyone that you care about them and you can win. For example, Kristen McDonald-Rivet won her congressional race in Michigan, defeating MAGA Republican Paul Young in a swing district, a district that Democrat Dan Kildee held in the Bay City, Saginaw, and Flint area. And look, I'm not saying that McDonald-Rivet is some big-time progressive. I don't think she is. But what she did and why she was able to win is because she talked normally to people and she talked normally in her spots. And that can go a long way too. I think people will gravitate towards you if you just relate to people. Just talk normally and with conviction, and the people will back you. Unfortunately, that's not the playbook that many Democrats followed across the country, and it's hurting us as people instead voted for the guy whose daddy gave him millions of dollars to start his adult life. That's unconscionable, and it makes me sick. Coming up, I'm going to delve more into what happened in this election and what must change with the Livingston County progressive activist Kasey Helton. So thanks again for listening. You can always contact me at leftoflansing@gmail.com. And Rich, thanks for all the help with the website.
A podcast devoted to intelligence, sanity, and freedom, or otherwise known as progressive politics. It's Left of Lansing with your host, Pat Johnston. Need to tell Pat where he's wrong? Or do you actually want to praise Pat? leftoflansing@gmail.com is how to reach him. Here's Pat.
Hey, don't forget to join me for my Monday YouTube live videos. I think I'll be doing those around 4 o'clock every Monday. I'm not doing Monday morning. That's way too early. But my brain starts to work again by around late afternoon Mondays. So please subscribe to Left of Lansing on both YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, of course. I am happy to have this week's guest on the air because not only does she have experience in being a progressive activist in a red Michigan county, not only does she have experience from being attacked by right-wing MAGA forces, which includes the Livingston County Sheriff himself, but she also recorded an insightful and productive Facebook Live video right after the election where she pointed to some of the reasons Kamala Harris and the Democrats fell short against the MAGA messaging machine. And I will provide a link to her video wherever you are listening to this. But I wanted to have her on the show this week because she's a truth teller and a great progressive fighter with a pragmatic streak, and I value her insights as much as anyone else's, especially more than old men clowns like James Carville, for instance. So Kasey Helton, thanks so much for coming back on and agreeing to help us as we continue to travel through the various stages of grief. Thanks a lot for being on.
Thank you so much, Pat, for having me on again. I really appreciate your willingness to platform the voices of everyday working class Americans.
Well, how are you doing?
We were just talking before we went on the air. We were talking about how I just learned about how Donald Trump had just nominated Matt Gaetz for AG. And I think it's just been one series of horrors after another this week in terms of nominations. And I think we're all, just still in a state of shock and grief. You mentioned my live. I talked in the beginning about grief and, my past experiences with it and how this election really did feel. It brought forward a lot of those same emotions that you experience in the grief process. And I think it's really important that people give themselves time to feel that they lean into it and don't feel weird about it. Just embrace that and go through the process in your own time. Everybody needs to come back into the fight, ready and willing to take that stand.
I mean, that's the thing. I'm not going to really criticize anybody who wants to check out here for a little while. I mean, a lot of people were engrossed in all of this for especially this whole year, and being as disappointed as they are in their fellow Americans and with the country and all that, I understand why they would want to sort of just check out for a while. But I really do hope, like you just said, that after they do that, maybe it's after the holidays, maybe it's after the winter, I'm not sure how long it will take, but I am hoping by sometime next year that everybody realizes, wait a second, this is our country too, and we just can't give it up to these guys.
And you know what people need to realize to kind of expand on that you shouldn't have to, and you don't need to do that alone. I think one of the key parts of moving forward is in your local community, finding that sense of community, finding your people is how I put it in my life. Get involved in your local activist groups, get involved with groups like your local Democratic Party. Not all Democrats are going to agree with or have the same view as to what happened, but it's still important to connect with those groups so that you can find a sense of community and a place. Everybody has a place in activism. Focus on when you're ready to go back Find the thing that makes you passionate, whether it's women's rights, labor, LGBTQ rights, racial justice. Find your lane and do what you can. Use your voice to get involved. Because really, I think that people tend to forget, but our country, the foundational greatness of our country was shaped by everyday people, not celebrities, not people with huge platforms, farmers and laborers and scholars. And they all came from humble roots. And I think there's a lesson to be learned there that you have to use that voice in a way that works for you.
Just to piggyback what you're saying, I heard another activist on some national radio show recently say, look, these next 2 years are going to be awful. And with Democrats not having much power on the federal side, we're just going to have to kind of take it as it comes. But if you are really looking to facilitate some kind of change and to maybe see it happening in real time, get involved maybe more with your local Democratic Party or local progressive groups, or, back some people who want to maybe go for the school board or for the city council races or county commission seats, whatever. Maybe starting local is the best place to go if you really want to see that change happening, more immediate than we're going to see on the federal level.
Absolutely, because where else does the messaging start? What do we know about communication? What do we know about how people grow to trust each other? They grow to trust each other through those community connections. And, I've seen a lot, and I talked about this on my live as well, where there is a lot of anger out there on social media from people who worked so hard to elect Kamala Harris. And it's understandable. I think that anger is part of that grief process. We're looking for reasons, we're looking for blame, but it is forming those community connections that can help change minds. You know what I mean? We have to learn how to talk with each other in productive ways, even when people may not agree with us. And I think that one of the factors that really affected this race has been the media, and we can talk about that later if you want, but how disinformation in the right-wing media has played such a role in this. And really, face-to-face contact from normal, everyday people is the first line of combating that. Talking to our friends, talking to our neighbors, if you're able to do that. And some people are in there, some people aren't. And that's okay too.
In the video that you did last week, you mentioned, Kasey, a couple of parts where Democrats made some mistakes in the election. And one part that you did highlight was how the Harris campaign fired out of the gate, celebrating unions and the working people. They really did. And she was making announcements that say a policy announcement really from the beginning about going after corporate price gouging. And I think that's why her numbers were really high there right out of the gate, because she was speaking to the working class. But then, as you pointed out, that kind of changed in the end. Yes, Democrats and progressives were all kind of trying to search for reasons, and maybe we are kind of going after each other a little bit. But I think these, in my opinion, I think these are healthy discussions to have. So I was wondering if you could maybe expound on that point about how Harris started talking to the working people, and then it kind of seemed like it changed a little bit, and just expand on that a little bit, if you don't mind.
Sure, absolutely. And I want to preface that by saying that, I'm not some sort of armchair quarterbacker here. I canvassed for Kamala Harris many, several times during that last quarter of her campaign. I donated, and I went to two of her rallies. Like you said, I went to the Detroit rally and I went to the Ann Arbor rally. So I'm speaking from somebody who wanted her to win and worked hard for her to win. But from what I have read in news reports, she started to take advice in those crucial last few weeks from more corporate interests. Mark Cuban, I think, was somebody who her brother-in-law was one of those millionaires who had donated a lot of money to her campaign, and others. And they were wanting her to focus more on why Donald Trump was a bad president, as opposed to talking about the very solid policies that Kamala was putting on her platform that would aid the working class. Things like housing affordability and down payment assistance, which I've tweeted about before, would be highly, highly beneficial to the working class. My husband, we're both union workers. I joined a union for the very first time this year. I'm a member of the Service Employers International Union that organized at University of Michigan Medicine. And my husband, he is a union steelworker. He's with USW. He's a veteran. And before we were married, he bought our house on a veteran's loan with down payment assistance. And the value of our home since he purchased it has tripled 3 times. It's the primary source of our personal wealth. It's our anchor. And we have to find ways in this country to make that more accessible to more people who have a solid rent history, who've proven themselves responsible making payments. So that was one thing, that I really did support. But I felt like in the last few weeks of the campaign, you heard less and less of that. It did seem somewhat, I noticed it at the Ann Arbor rally. Another thing, student loan forgiveness. We were at University of Michigan campus with thousands of students, and student loan forgiveness never even came up. Meanwhile, the Missouri AG and several other right-wing Republican AGs have waged an all-out attack on borrowers in the court. Judge shopping, anything to deny relief to working families who are being sunk by student loans, myself included. I have student loan debt, and I've been working, to get back on track. But now all of that is in the air because of the court cases that these Republican AGs are bringing in these right-wing MAGA states. So yeah, I think that it is definitely an issue that the Democrats need to learn to get more comfortable on the economy, talking about the economy. I think they need to be as comfortable talking about the economy as they are about social justice. And I do sometimes sense that there's discomfort with Democrats when talking about the economy.
Oh, absolutely. And for me, it was also, so you're talking about how her campaign sort of had just a change through time from that first time you saw her in Detroit to the last time. Because when she was in Ann Arbor, was that the Sunday before?
Yeah, it was right before.
But you would get these mixed messages, and I never thought it helped. And I brought this up before, but I'm going to bring it up with you and maybe just get your take on it. Speaking of mixed messaging, I remember back at the Democratic convention, and it was the night that they had Bernie Sanders talk. And, Bernie was Bernie, and he was talking about how the working man is getting screwed by the corporations and corporate corruption, corporate greed, everything that Bernie has always talked about for, 50 years or so. And then about a half hour later, up walks to the stage, I believe, the CEO of American Express. And I remember I just thought to myself, I said, are there people who are going to be moved by this guy? And how many people say, yes, I love credit card companies. Yes, please speak some truth to me. I thought that was also a mistake, too. And I think that's what you're getting at, is that I think the Democratic Party, it's sort of stuck in this neoliberalism sphere in a way. It's like they want to, at times, be the party they used to be back in the FDR days, JFK days, for instance, but they sometimes still want to keep remaining in this Bill Clinton era. I don't know. What do you think?
I don't want to light anyone's hair on fire, but I do feel that to some extent, the establishment who makes the decisions in the Democratic Party is out of touch with the base of the everyday working class members that we have in our base. And that is why we've been bleeding members of the working class. And I think you touched on it exactly, that there really was not a clear economic contrast. There was a good platform from the Harris campaign, but it wasn't presented as enough of a contrast because of these mixed messages, like you said, bringing corporate titans on stage right after Bernie Sanders. Well, what is an everyday working American who's struggling to pay their bills? Like, how does that are they to make sense of that? I just read today that there was a graph that was put out based on census data where over 60% of Americans were living paycheck to paycheck in 2024, up from 51% in 2021. It shifted down drastically during COVID because we had these social supports. And I know that couldn't go on indefinitely, but I think where Democrats dropped the ball is we had these COVID relief benefits. And I know myself and my husband, we had a lot of financial growth during that time. We felt safe. We felt like we had breathing room, we had a little room to breathe during that time, but there was no extended plan to keep that going, to keep that message going, to show people really how Democrats were going to continue to develop policies like that to benefit them. The bottom line is, Pat, if you have to cite the consumer price index to explain to people why things are good, you're doing it wrong. You're losing the debate. That's not what people want to see. They want to hear results. They want to hear how these policies affect them, and they don't want to be argued with when they're saying that they are struggling. They want to be listened to, and they want to hear what you're going to do about it. And I just think that didn't translate in this election.
I just want to stick on this just a little bit about the mixed messaging. It's just something that I read, I think it was this morning. When it comes to mixed messaging, I get a little frustrated. Okay, let me strike that. I get a lot frustrated when we just spent the last few months hearing Kamala, hearing Joe Biden, hearing the Obamas, hearing Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer all tell us how this was, the most important election ever, how democracy is on the line. But once it was over and Trump won and Republicans triumphed, all of a sudden I hear Joe Biden telling us the next day, hey, don't worry, everything's going to be okay. And then Whitmer this morning or yesterday saying that she's trying to focus on where we can find some shared priorities with the Republican Party here in the state. Well, see, that gives mixed messages to voters, I think, and makes them ask, well, if Whitmer's saying she can work with these so-called radicals on the right wing, I guess maybe they're not so bad after all. And that kind of stuff just makes me bang my head against the wall, Kasey.
I tend to agree with that. I don't understand why Democrats, if there's one lesson that Democrats could learn from the MAGA contingent, it's that they do it in a way that's fake, right? Like this is all a ruse, right? This is right. Everything that you see that comes from MAGA land is nothing more than a ruse for Trump to raid the stores for both himself and his rich friends in oil, in tech, you name it, any sort of thriving industry here. They're going to raid the stores and leave. But they're very good at convincing people that they're going to fight for them. And that's what people want. That's what Democrats want. And they want to see that. Here's the thing, Pat, and I was telling my husband this today. This is how our society is. We want an enemy. Okay, we need a big bad wolf. Okay, MAGA has a big bad wolf. The Democrats thought that they could portray Trump as the big bad wolf. But I think it failed for exactly the reasons you just said. It sends a mixed message. Is he really a big bad wolf if you're going to work with him? I mean, how bad can he possibly be? I think that Democrats would have served themselves much better if they would have showed, and I think this is where the focus needs to continue to go, because I'm not about looking at the past and bemoaning that. I'm about the future, Pat. I am about the future. Right. We need to define exactly who the big bad wolf is. And I think the people who are struggling in the working class, they know exactly who the big bad wolf is, and they've told us. Now they're greatly misled in who's going to fix that problem, but they feel as though Trump is going to be the one to defend their economic interests for whatever reason, which is just absolutely insane because he's one of them. Right. But that's our strength. We're not one of them. We have a proven record in Congress, in the presidency, of going after corporations, antitrust, making billionaires pay their fair share in taxes. We have somewhat of a track record of that. We need to keep building on it and driving home. That is who is really out to destroy our country, to destroy the working class and our legacy. And they need to get on that. And listen, I understand what Gretchen Whitmer is saying to a point, and all these other statewide politicians that you mentioned. They kind of don't have a choice. In a way, they have to try to work with these leaders because this is just the reality we're in right now. But it's the messaging, Pat. It's the messaging. That's what people need to hear.
Michigan Public Radio released a chilling story today. I heard it, and it was about the election here in our state. But yet, I don't think it really should surprise anyone. And it says that while voting numbers increased in the state, those increases happened in rural counties. And I just want to read a paragraph here, if you don't mind. It says, Wayne County, the state's largest county by population, actually had fewer votes in 2024 than 2020. Other urban and suburban counties like Kalamazoo, Oakland, and Genesee saw tiny increases under 1%. But voter turnout increased dramatically in rural counties like Kalkaska, Lake, Roscommon, Montcalm. These are the counties with the highest percentage growth in voter turnout from 2020 to 24. That growth just wasn't concentrated in a few rural counties. It says that gains in voter turnout were not evenly distributed across the state, that rural counties made up around 19% of the population, or they make up about 19% of the population, but 40% of the increased voter turnout compared to 2020. Now, look, that's not good. And it's one of the main reasons why I talk to rural Democrats and progressives, such as yourself, the dirt road Democrats, because I don't think the party, in my opinion, has done really a great job of maintaining a real presence in those communities. Now, I'm not attacking, let's say, the Livingston County Democratic Party, which has done a fine job and has made some big gains. We've talked about it in the past here on the show, and there are other parts of the state that have done fine too. But the numbers, they are the numbers. And Mark Ludwig, head of the Michigan Democratic Party's rural caucus, said in the same story that Democrats don't run enough candidates and that they become a non-factor in those areas. I look at it this way, Kasey. We need a strategy mirroring like the old Howard Dean 50 state strategy here in the state of Michigan, in which we fight everywhere. And I don't think we're doing that exactly.
And I want to say this, too. I think that the Livingston Democrats gave it everything they could this time around. They ran county commission candidates in these down ballot races. They ran in every seat. No seat went unchallenged. And several of the candidates ran very active campaigns. And out of that, we had one who really made gains. We have this thing where it's like there's a 30% ceiling with county commission races out here, and Democrats can never seem to get past it. I ran for the county commission 3 times.
Right.
2018, 2020, and 2022. And every single time I hit that 35 ceiling. Elizabeth Hauptman ran out in the Genoa Township, Hamburg area, Brighton area, where that intersects, and managed to get up to 42, which was great. That's an area where the local Dems really need to put focus here. These local parties need to find these pockets where there's any sort of inroad and just really, I think, hyper focus in those areas. But yeah, I really do hope that the Democratic Party, the Michigan Democratic Party, will take a look at those numbers and realize that we have got to do more outreach to these rural areas and suburban areas, and with messaging that resonates with them and what they're struggling with.
All right. And finally, you mentioned it earlier. Well, there's a lot of blame to go around. I think we do have to just realize that the right wing, they are better funded, and they just have a much more powerful way to reach people, and they can do it through misinformation, and more misinformation. I'm hoping that we are learning here that we as progressives and Democrats, whatever, that we need just a better way to communicate with each other. I was wondering what your take is on that.
I think that the Democrats need to start investing. They need to do like the Republicans have done, because they are running circles around us in social media, on all the algorithms, Facebook, YouTube, X, anyone that you can think of. Their social media infrastructure vastly surpasses what we have. And let's be honest, Pat, this is how people get their news these days. Listen, I worked as a journalist 20 years ago. I was a journalist for my local paper. I love newspapers. I love media. But we are in a new era here, where people get soundbite information, and it's online through these viral videos. We have got to figure out a way in the Democratic Party to get our investors, the people with the money who invest in our party, to help build that in a way that takes messages that reach younger people about issues that are important to them, and broadcast that out there through podcasts, through TikToks, through all of that. And not just the base voters, though, Pat. We need to find ways to grow our base using that media. That's the challenge. There's so many great TikToks out there about women's rights and things like that, and I love them. But those are all people who agree with us. What are we going to do about the voters who are not entirely sure where they stand? These reluctant Trump voters, which they are out there. Trump managed to get these new voters. It's not impossible. We have to do the same. We have to figure out a way to do that. So hopefully the party will really seriously look at investing in that media landscape. We have Distill Social, which if you're anyone who is listening who doesn't follow Distill Social, either on X or TikTok, I'm not a part of Distill Social, but I follow their content. You should definitely follow them. But we need more like that, more outlets like that speak to people's issues of concern.
Absolutely. And Gina Keller and everybody there at Distill Social, they do a hell of a job. Kasey, if people like to follow you and reach you, I think they've got a number of places where they can go, right?
I'm on Blue Sky now. Everyone needs to go to Blue Sky. There's a mass exodus to Blue Sky now. You can find me on Blue Sky. I changed my handle just for fun. I changed it to Mini Fridge.
Okay.
So if you look up the word Mini Fridge, you can find me on Blue Sky under Mini Fridge, at Blue Sky Social. But I'm also on Twitter under my own name, Kasey Helton 05. I'm on Facebook, and there's talk of me reigniting a podcast with a friend of mine. I'll be posting more about that in the future too. Yeah, so I'm not going away.
All right, you're still gonna
stay there.
You're still gonna have a presence on Twitter?
Absolutely. I will still be posting on Twitter for sure. Yes.
Yeah. No, I get the whole thing of going to Blue Sky, and I've even set up an account there. I haven't done anything on it just yet, but I just refuse to really want to just see ground even to Elon Musk. And I'm still going to have a presence there. No,
you're right. Yeah. You have to. No, we still need to stay in those spaces. Absolutely.
Livingston County progressive activist and growing progressive influencer, Kasey Helton, thanks so much for offering your insights and explanations. I really needed to hear what you had to say on everything. And it's going to be rough here for the next 2 years, but knowing that we've got you on the front lines here in Michigan and fighting for the common good helps a lot. I mean, you're awesome. So thanks, Kasey.
Thank you so much, Pat. And I'm happy that you're one of my people.
A podcast that believes in using common sense to move Michigan into the future. And by common sense, we mean progressive sense. We've all seen what 40 years of Republican leadership did to this state, and we refuse to go back. It's Left of Lansing with Pat Johnston. You can follow Pat on Facebook or X, Pat still calls it Twitter, or on the Gram, Threads, and also on YouTube. Subscribe to the show on YouTube and wherever else you listen to your podcasts. All right, I think we gave Pat enough time to catch his breath. Let's get back to it. Here's Pat Johnston.
Let me say, it would be so awesome to have Kasey back in the podcasting game, and I loved hearing that making it a reality is in the works. So thanks again to Kasey Helton for taking some of her valuable time on being on here this week. I'm entirely grateful. Time now for the Left of Lansing Last Call. I just wanted to share this email I received from a listener after my show last week, in which I just had one segment because I didn't really have it in me to do a full show. But this email really and truly lifted my spirits and helped in a big way in getting me back into the studio here this week. And it's from Sandy, and whenever I read emails, sometimes I feel like Casey Kasem. Whenever, he'd read letters, he'd say, and here's your long-distance dedication. The kids have zero idea what I'm talking about, I know. Anyway, Sandy emailed the following, and I'm going to read here. I'm originally from Michigan, but I've lived in Windsor, Ontario for the past 14 years. I don't know how I found your podcast, and I've never sent an email to any podcast host before, but I listened to your post-election fallout episode, and it was really moving to me. I'm feeling the same things you are. I'm devastated and still can't really wrap my head around the results. My family has been torn apart because of Trump and the QAnon movement, and I'm scared for what's to come. Anyway, I just wanted to thank you for your honesty and vulnerability and the work that you do to make Michigan and the rest of the country a better place. Those kinds of emails really mean a lot to those of us putting together podcasts, which Kasey Helton and I just talked about, that aren't really getting a huge amount of financial backing, unlike many right-wing platforms and projects. We put our time and effort into this whole thing because we care about the common good, and we care about spreading common sense, progressive values to as many people as possible. Look, I started this venture because I love communicating, and I wanted to try my hand at podcasting after years in broadcasting. Okay, I will admit, selfishly, I wanted something where I could say whatever I wanted to say and not have some corporate GM or station manager tell me what I could or couldn't say, but unselfishly, I wanted to help fellow progressives connect with one another and provide a platform and a show that many people weren't hearing anywhere else. Most of all, something that they would never get in corporate terrestrial radio. I'm not going to lie, it's a lot of hard work and some late hours, but it's worth it because, well, first and foremost, I love it, and I'm glad that some of you like it, which is why emails like the ones that I get from Sandy mean so much, essentially in times like this when we're feeling like we're walking in the wilderness and feeling alone. But as you heard from Kasey, you are not alone. There's many of us here who will continue fighting to help make the state of Michigan and the country a better place by speaking up for the many voiceless Americans in the working class. That's always been my goal, and it's something that I'll keep pushing because, as I said earlier, I can't cash out and give up this country to those advocating for corporate oligarchy and authoritarianism. I just can't.
You're listening to the Left of Lansing podcast. The music you're hearing is by Wander Beats. To hear the latest project, check out Space Leopard on your favorite streaming site. Now back to our favorite progressive voice in Michigan. It's Pat Johnston.
That's going to do it for the Left of Lansing this week. I'm hoping to have one of our shining progressive state representatives on the show next week because the Michigan legislature's in lame duck, which means that the next few weeks are crucial for the Democratic majority to pass some meaningful bills before Republicans take the state house on New Year's Day. But I'm getting some rumbling that a couple of Democrats are gumming up the progress on some real progressive bills that'll help the people in Michigan and help protect many people before the incoming Trump administration takes over in 2 months. Please tell me the Democratic leadership in Lansing is learning that being Republican-liked is a loser strategy. Thanks again to my good friend Kasey Helton for being on again this week. Remember, you can contact me on Twitter, the Gram, Facebook, and also on Blue Sky. You can subscribe to the show on YouTube, and don't forget about the YouTube live video Monday at 4 p.m. And of course, subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. I will leave on a good note. There's a real possibility, a good possibility, the Detroit Lions will be 9-1 when we talk again next week. I never thought I'd see the day when they'd be considered one of the best in the league. So, hey, we've got that at least. Until next time, remember, take the battle to them. Thank you, Michigan.
The Left of Lansing podcast was produced by Pat Johnston, written by Pat Johnston, researched by Pat Johnston, edited by Pat Johnston, and hosted by, yes, Pat Johnston. Technical assistance by Dr. Heather. And thanks to our good friend Kirsten for the awesome podcast logo. Remember to visit leftoflansing.com for more news and information. Thanks again for listening to the Left of Lansing podcast.